Hello Booktube, I'm Scott.
I'm Nelle.
We're gunpowder.fiction.and.plot. Today we're discussing the book Detransition Baby by Torrey. Synopsis.
Detransition Baby is about a transgendered woman who detransitions and then gets into a relationship with their boss, who is a cis woman, and they get pregnant. When Ames, the transgender woman who detransitions, when Ames is confronted with the idea of being a father,
Has a bit of a freak out, really.
Yeah, confronted, I think, with what that means about his gender and the permanency of his gender journey, and comes up with the solution to include as a third parent his former lover, transgender woman.
Reese,
thank you.
I'm not really sure how that is a solution, but it's an excellent paradigm to discuss, isn't it?
It is.
Who would like it? Anybody who likes having their idea of the world challenged. I thought it was really fascinating to find out more about the trans experience, to just understand them and see how similar we are and all of that. I thought that was really challenging and confronting, and I really liked that about this book.
Yeah, I definitely think that this is a good book for anyone who doesn't know much about trans people, because I feel like, as well as being an interesting story and an excellent character study, it is a little bit of a primer for those who don't have much language or understanding of the realities of the trans experience. Not that it covers every angle of every person's experience ever, but I think it's a good starting point, maybe.
If you're an expert on trans people, Torrey is writing her work to trans people. I think the idea of a throuple is really put forward in this as
and also non-romantic families.
It's such an interesting, the relationship discussion in this is actually really thought-provoking and really interesting, and I don't think there's another book out there that I can think about that does that discussion.
Before you read this,
go right in, go in unexpected, read a Stephen King book beforehand.
What about if you like?
Well, if you liked it, I think that the book that we've read recently that really is a really good book to read just after this is Daryl by Jackie.
Yeah.
Okay, what did we think of the plot?
I think the plot was fine, but it wasn't, for me, the focus.
Yeah, I think I agree. The plot was relatively weak, but it was entertaining and it was there.
Yeah, I think that the plot is definitely the hook that they're using to sell Detransition Baby, but it's not the thing that I walked away with.
No, I think the thing that you should walk away with is the characters and the themes.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, shall we start with the themes? I thought this book was so thought-provoking. The scene where they're talking about trans women breastfeeding and how they just need a tablet or an injection. I forget what it is, but they need a hit of this hormone and suddenly they start lactating.
Yeah.
And it brought up a really interesting theme, because then they said that, because I was just so fascinated by that, and then they clocked me in that by saying, and all straight men are endlessly fascinated by that, because I don't know whether I think the book said, I don't know whether they're just obsessed with anything to do with boobs, or whether they realise that they could breastfeed themselves. And I was like, yes. It's exactly the thought process I was having.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's super interesting that, given that we know how to do this, that the breastfeeding burden is still 100% the domain of women in our society. If there is no big repercussions and dads can lactate, then why can't dads share that? I think that's... Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Are you completely freaked out?
I am freaked out. I don't know what I think about that, and...
I mean, why the fuck should I be the one who gets up at 3 o'clock in the morning every day if you can take a pill and share it?
I don't know. I'm having an emotional response to an intellectual question. And that is what this book is like, though.
Yeah.
The last time I entered a relationship was a decade ago, and I didn't even know there was such a thing as a trans person a decade ago.
Yeah.
And so I started to question, could I date a trans woman?
Yeah.
It's like that. There's a trans stand-up comedian who has a wonderful joke about genitalia. Said, genitalia is like Mexican food. It's all the same. It's just how you fold it. I'm forced to question these things by reading this book, and that is not something I've ever done. And for me, the answer to these questions are not simple.
I don't think any of the answers to these questions are simple, and I think that this is actually part of the journey that trans people are asking us to take. They're asking us to question our gender, because if you haven't questioned your gender, then you can't be secure in it. And I think those people who are afraid to face the possibilities are potentially the people more likely to be bigoted and violent.
Yes, absolutely.
Because I think that often comes from fear.
Yes.
I definitely think that one of the themes of this book is that transition is not a linear process. This is not, you don't question and then figure out that you're a trans man or a trans woman and then live openly and then transition and then ta-da, you're a complete human being. That's not how it happens. And it's a volatile, moving, shape-shifting thing that is being conducted in the context of a society that does not understand it.
And I think having Ames in there is such a really good demonstration of this, because we have this character who we're told detransitioned, but really Ames transitioned twice. Well, that's not... I mean...
I feel like you and I interpret Ames differently. I feel that Ames is still a trans woman, but has chosen to present masculine because society's can't.
Yeah, I feel like Ames is a trans woman in it too. I feel like Ames has made the decision that given everything that's going on, society being a cunt, that Ames would be happier as a man, but they are still trans. And that is...
Yeah, and that is
how I interpret Ames.
And that is totally a fine...
Oh, I'm totally down for anybody picking their happiness and their mental health.
It's a shitty rock and a hard place decision to have to make, I think. The concept of detransitioning is so often touted by by transphobes as proof that they never should have transitioned in the first place. I mean, the idea that you transition and you live as a woman for 10 years and then you detransition and that means that whole 10 years was pointless and a waste of your time and miserable. You could transition 4 or 5 times in your life and be a different gender for 4 or 5 different periods, and that is just what makes you happy at that time, and that is totally and completely valid.
Well, there are people out there who are gender fluid.
Yeah.
Why is that a valid identity, but detransitioning not?
Exactly. Characters. I think the characters were awesome. Yeah,
I think there are 4 just standout amazing characters in this. Katrina, Stanley, Reese, and Ames. I felt connected and I understood those characters. A book that can make you empathise with a character whose gender identity you find confusing is really good when that's all it's discussing, you know?
I think that's really interesting. I think that women are used to not seeing women represented and are more likely to identify across gender boundaries. And I think that men struggle to do that because they don't have to. And I feel like this is I feel like it's a muscle. Do you know what I mean? Like, if you don't use it, you lose it. Because I don't find it difficult to identify with people who are different gender to me.
I certainly don't have a problem with empathising with women when I read books. Trans is not something I completely have my head around. Certainly, since reading this book, I feel like I've gotten a much better grasp of it. But it's not something I have my head around. The questioning of gender and the importance of it is not something I have my head around either.
I really liked that they all had sort of flaws and foibles, and I really enjoyed that the trans community that was depicted was community enough to have similarities, but they weren't caricatures or so similar that you couldn't tell the difference. Do you know what I mean? It wasn't a bunch of teenage girls wearing the same clothes, if you get what I'm saying.
Writing.
I really liked the writing. I thought that it was never pretentious. It packed a punch where it needed to, and it pulled its punches most of the time, and trusted the reader to go the next step and to take that leap of understanding. Yeah.
Setting. How did the setting of this book affect it?
I'm going to say something weird. The New Yorkness, for me, put it up against Sex and the City, which, when I was sort of in my late teens and early 20s, was the discussion of female sexuality and female identity. And so putting it in that same sort of space, these 3 women, trans woman, cis woman, and detransitioned trans woman, in that same environment, negotiating new relationship stuff, it was correct that it be in New York.
Look, you thought it was in New York. I couldn't have told you where it was. I really feel like the setting, the feel of everything changed in scenes with Stanley in it. the emotional tenseness, the atmosphere really changed in scenes with Stanley. It was dangerous when Stanley was around and tense, and the threat of violence was there.
There was one scene where the three of them first meet for the and they're outside the gala and they're talking, and they could so easily just descend into talking at cross purposes and not understanding each other. And the absolute refusal to give up communication, the tenacity of holding on and holding back that reactiveness and searching for what the other person is trying to say rather than clinging to what you hear. For me, that is so core to female relationships.
I've seen a few people review this and say it's not the best piece of literature, but they're really glad they've read it. I think that's really unfair to the quality of literature in this. But I still think it's
I think
really
the writing
exceptional.
is really good. There are so many things that this book talks about. There is a moment with Reese that I was right there fucking with her as she was walking into the fucking sea. Her grief over not being a mother was a gut-wrenching thing that I think a lot of women can relate to, and that felt like a shared experience as women that I didn't think could bridge cis-trans boundaries.
It's a reference to The Awakening by Kate Chopin.
Oh, I don't know.
It's a really early feminist novel. It's a really popular American feminist novel. Ratings and final thoughts. So, how many stars did I rate this book? I gave it all 5.
All 5? This was an excellent read. I believe it's one that everyone should read. I will recommend it to all the people. The payoff is just so good. It just reminded me that intersectional feminism, we're not free until we're all free, is about making sure that those of us who have it the hardest get lifted up. It really drove home that if we focus on those of us who have it the hardest, those of us who have it the easiest, all our shit will get fixed. It just fucking will. Like, we are included in them as long as we include them.
Get out there and read it.
Okay, love you. Bye.
Bye.